Hi everyone, I'm Gary, and whether this is your first time behind the Game Master screen or you're a bit of an old salt like me, here are my five top tips that all Game Masters should consider when running fantastic campaigns. Okay, I'm going to run through my top five things, or what I think are five really good, useful, practical, implementable tips for improving your game mastering. Now, before we say that, I want to say, I'm no expert. I don't profess to suggest that these are useful in every single situation. In fact, actually, that I really strongly believe that there's an exception to every single rule, and I do firmly believe that game mastering is a craft that as a group of people we can work on, and it benefits ourselves and our players if we do consciously try and work on it. Also, these tips are in no particular order. It's not a countdown, it's just the order that I think they most naturally fit together. But they are practical, they are things that I think would really help. So, let's get started. So, number one, prep what you'll use. This is something that frequently comes up, especially with prep heavy systems like 5e, but it's useful for anything. And actually, it can be incredibly important when running trad scenarios or highly linear or highly narrativist scenarios, like a Call of Cthulhu scenario or a Woothrup scenario. So only prep what you use. Remember, nothing exists in the game if it only exists in your head. So the temptation as game masters, and this is something that I find when I speak to teenagers when they're first starting out game mastering and they're thinking about what they want. The temptation is to design loads of things that don't have any practical use. It doesn't matter if you're going to write 5,000 years of history for your campaign setting, if the players have no practical way of accessing it, and even if they can access it, it has no useful bearing on the game. So prep what you'll use. And as part of that, as a kind of sub point to number one, it's worth breaking down what is campaign prep and what is session prep. What do I need for the campaign and what do I need next session? And to some extent, where we are encouraged sometimes as game masters, especially as we begin to explore the philosophies of game mastering, to really just focus on that second one, the next session, which is really important and it outweighs the former, but it's not the only thing. So prepping what you use, there is different types of prep, and I would emphasize the preparation of evergreen material. And what I mean by that is things like encounter tables, because then when your players go traveling, you can roll that random encounter table and it's going to give you sensible prompts for your particular setting, your particular geographic location in that place. So in that moment. And that's really helpful. That is much more useful to you than going, I'm going to roll out a group of encounters and I'm going to design exactly how they fit together. Because one, it allows you to separate yourself from the game world, lending verisimilitude and truth to what's going on. But also, it means that those encounter tables, they're ready next time you want to go traveling. The other thing that you could prep that I think is a really good example of evergreen prep is maps that you frequently use, NPCs that they frequently pictures of NPCs that they frequently interact with. Those things that you're going to pull out session after session after session from your folder, from your DM notes, they can be really helpful. They are more useful to you than planning a scenario, planning a moment that is going to happen once and then they're never going to return to it. That's why you should never, and just I get this from Justin Alexander, and his blog The Alexandrian, you should never plan contingencies because you find yourself bogging yourself down in things that are useless because what happens is you sit there and go, oh, if they do this, then they could do, this could happen or this could happen or this could happen, but they could do this or this or this. And you end up trying to think about what should happen in response to things. Do not do that. You need to plan evergreen material, prep what you'll use, and only plan conflict. Plan the things that they're going to interact with. Don't ever consider the consequences because that is not your job and it's not you're going to burn out, right? I run 3 campaigns right now and that is pretty intense, and if I planned much more than I did, I wouldn't be able to do it. Always as part of this as well, when you're doing your preparation for a session, consider the opening of a session. I think it's perfectly fine to start in a tavern with a group of characters meeting if that is what you intend to happen, as long as you've given it some consideration and thought. You don't need to always start in medias res. That is sometimes helpful, starting in the middle of action, but sometimes it's not particularly helpful. Actually, sometimes it is worth having a slower start where the characters begin to interact with each other. A really good example of that is in the Woothrup scenario, If Looks Could Kill, which I reviewed here, where you have a scenario where characters get to know each other at the beginning and then we move into the action quite quickly. Let's have a look at the second tip. Number two, point the camera. And I spent a long time conceptualizing what I mean by this. So as the game master, you are describing the setting most of the time. You're describing actions, you're describing reactions, and you're describing the game world. And it's therefore up to you where everyone's mind's eye is looking. And it's really important that what you are describing are the things you are moving through texture, what I would call just description, interesting moments, but not anything that they're necessarily going to interact with, and moving to the decision points. This is for pace and engagement. And you are deciding what everyone is looking at in their mind's eye at any given moment. And you're also thinking about what is the decision that they're going to reach. When I stop talking and when I finish my description, I finish my moment, what are they going to say? What are they going to be considering? So, for example, if your players, they're entering a city, they're going to find an inn. This is really important, right? You describe the exterior of the inn, and then you go, right, it's a 2-story building, it's half timbered, and there's the smell of cooking meat inside and ale stained tables. What do you do? That is not how you should end that. It's really not pointing the camera at the decision moment, because it's like, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to either stand outside, which is what they might end up, your players are going to end up arguing about because you've stopped the camera, the tracking shot there, or they're going to say the obvious thing, which is we go inside and we order a beer. What you should do is you describe the outside and then you say, stepping through the door, you step into a smoky tavern. The innkeeper shuffles up and he explains to you that it's a bit busy because they've got a visiting noble, but he'll be back in a moment. And he also says to them, I assume you'll be wanting drinks and a bed. And then you sit back for 10 seconds, let the players decide what they're going to talk about. Like, oh, there's a noble here, blah, blah, blah. And then you say, right, the innkeeper shuffles back. He shows you to a table and he asks you, are you wanting board? Are you wanting a bath? Or are you just wanting something to eat? And then you stop there. You've stopped at the moment of decision. They've got to decide, do they want these things? And that is really, really, really important. You are trying to keep that tracking shot of the player characters going for as long as possible. You are doing this in every single moment. You don't need to say you took another another 10 feet steps down the dungeon corridor, and then another, and then another. You say you move down the corridor 30 feet and you reach the junction. Which way do you go, left or right? This is something that I think is really important that nobody ever spelled out for me when I was starting out, over half my lifetime ago. That would be really helpful. Important. Keep the camera moving, keep the action moving, keep the texture rolling and the description going until the characters reach a decision point. And that's not always easy. That is something that comes with practice and consideration. And as I said right at the beginning, game mastering is a craft. You can improve on it by keep doing a lot of it. Let's look at number 3. Number 3. Read a lot. Read loads. Read literally everything you can get your hands on. This is so important. I think that lots of people fall back on game fantasies, specifically video games that they've played, for example, or really, really popular films, but video games are the real bane, right? That is not going to help you because all it does is fill you with the same ideas that everyone else is going. I have talked about the kind of things that I think all game masters should read. I did that here in this video. The reason you've got to read a lot is because it exposes you to 3 different things: inspiration, vocabulary, and concept. Inspiration, right? Have you read Conan the Barbarian? Do you understand where this comes? Do you understand where the barbarian archetype comes from? Have you read Farfred and the Grey Mouse and understand where the thief archetype comes from? Do you get these different things? And are they inspiring? Have you read John Carter of Mars? And you're going, oh, I'd love to do a Spelljammer campaign now. Right? They also improve your vocabulary, your literal quality of description. Now, you don't want any of that nonsense about, women with alabaster skin and all that kind of crap, right? What you want actually is useful, interesting vocabulary that can be used to convey a particular tone. So, for example, whenever I describe a wizard study, I always describe books of cantraps, for example. Cantraps is just mean cantrip, right? It's just an alternative spelling or an alternative way of saying cantrip. But what it does is it adds a little bit of mystique, a little bit of mystery, but nobody sat on the table doesn't know what that means, right? Everybody knows what I'm saying. And it's about using vocabulary to build up a particular tone, right? You need to go away and read H.P. Lovecraft, right? That guy, you can tell he was being paid by the word because everything is over-described and you get these wonderful bits of vocabulary like ichor and necrophagus. Even if you just read The Statement of Randolph Carter, it's like 2 pages of a 2-page short story that Lovecraft wrote. Go and read that. And then lastly, concepts, big ideas. Like I said, things like John Carter of Mars, understanding that you can tell a sci-fi story. Things like Jack Vance's Dying Earth, understanding that you can tell strange kind of post-historic, slightly psychedelic stories. All of these different things are really important. And also, as part of your reading, you should be reading modules. Do not be so hubristic. And I admit, I was like this probably the first 5 years of game mastering. You are not going to write something better than what other people are being paid to write. So or you might do, but you're going to have read a lot of stuff first. So read what other people have written, read other modules, read other adventures, because that will give you such fantastic, useful ideas to drop into your own world and your own campaign. I can't convey that enough. The value that I place on reading. I think the biggest cardinal sin in life is to be a dull, boring person. And the way you make yourself a more interesting person, the only way I think you make yourself a more interesting person is by knowing more stuff. You know more stuff by reading. Number 4. So, encourage victory. And sometimes I hear this as kind of be a fan of the players, and I don't entirely like that as a description, because I think actually I'm a bit of a simulationist. Not entirely. I understand that there are limits to that, but I like the idea of the world feeling as true to life, as real, as sensibly real as possible. And therefore, I'm not going to modify elements of the game world on a whim to make players succeed. I'm not going to fudge dice rolls. I roll all my dice in the open. I think that's really important. And I'm not going to change outcomes based on any particular kind of like unwantedness on the players. And this does not also mean, encouraging victory does not mean moving encounters in the path of players, so-called quantum ogre encounters. Like, we don't do that either. What we do is we ensure that the scenarios that we run, we put together, provide reasonable tools to be victorious and to build on victories. People like to feel like they're progressing. It's why my own system, Journeyman Expert Master, which I lay out in this video, really focuses on giving people things to choose when they level up. People like feeling like they're improving. And this is the same even within the scenario. They like small victories to be built upon. So, I mean, small victories have to outweigh defeats. Your players will not remain your players if they feel like they're not getting anywhere. You will come across as arbitrary, and nobody wants that. Everybody basically comes around the table to have a good time, and they come around the table to feel the victory. I always think that, to some extent, there's a stereotype of the game master as this kind of like horrible person who wants to kill the players. It's like, that is such a myth. Actually, any game master who is halfway decent, which is basically everyone, right, wants their players to do well, like delights in their players' victories because they want them to overcome it. And as part of that, small victories telegraph things like puzzles. There's a really good one in the Jeweler Sanctuary, which is in OSC Anthology, Adventure Anthology 1, where the players can find a secret door. And it's not like they just walk into a room and they wander around and they can search and they can find a secret door. They could do that, but actually there's a chance that they get an encounter where a ghost of a previous adventure in this dungeon is injured, and she staggers into this room, her ghostly form, and she goes through the secret door. And it's like, players, every time I've run that, the players are like, oh, there's a secret door there. They're not like, oh, that was a bit easy finding that secret door because she went for it. It's like, they feel like they're being rewarded for paying attention, for they feel like something has clicked, and that is rewarding for everyone. I think that player victories must outweigh player defeats at least 3-1. They've got to feel like most of the time they're moving forward and things are getting better for them and they're achieving the things that they laid out. I ran the Music of the Spheres is Chaos DCC 100. You can see my review of that here. But the end of that, or one time I ran it, the player characters, they failed to some extent. You're trying to stop the awakening of this ancient void dragon, basically, and my players failed, and it came into existence. And what did my players do? Well, they could cast Wish and they were playing my system, Journeyman Expert Master, and they didn't have enough. Effectively, they didn't have enough FP, which is kind of like spell slots. They didn't have enough like power left to do it, to cast Wish, to wish this thing out of existence. So I said, well, you can trade FP 1-to-1 for levels, and they burn nearly 1 million experience points as a group to be able to cast Wish to wish this thing out of existence. And that is really brutalizing, taking their levels off them. But at the end of it, they did not feel like they had lost. They felt like they had been willing to sacrifice it all to defeat this monster. And they came out with some interesting treasure. Yeah, they're going to have to earn that experience points back. But they felt like overall it was a victory. And that is what I'm interested in. Number 5. be the biggest nerd, right? And I tried to think of several different ways of explaining this or different ways of naming this in number five, because that's not exactly what I mean. But it's the best articulation of my idea. You set the tone for your table. You carry the energy for everyone. You are the licensor of the fun that everyone picks up. You are the connoisseur of everyone else's enjoyment. If you want your player characters to talking character, your players a talking character, for example, you've got to be willing to do that. You might not be willing, and that's okay. Like, that doesn't make you a bad role player. In fact, actually, I don't think doing a silly voice is necessarily indicative of a good role player at all. But if you want the players to behave a certain way, you must be willing to set that tone and that example. If you want them to be simulationists and check for traps constantly, you have got to, you've got to lay out the traps. You've got to punish them for not doing that. You have got to be the energy of your table, because actually we like to think of the game master as, it would be nice to think that we're just another player, but we are not. We are leading the table. We are the leader of people, and we are setting that tone. You are setting your stall out. It's kind of like a teacher in a classroom, right? You've got to lay out what you want from the people around you and what they can expect from you. And in doing that, everyone ends up on the same page in terms of their expectations, and they end up on the same page in terms of their fun. Now, they're my five, they're not necessarily my top tips, but they're five really practical ideas that I think are really useful, that are worth your consideration, worth musing on and grappling with and thinking about, because that's what makes this game enjoyable. That's what makes this gig enjoyable, right? Being a game master is all about coming up with new ideas and considering the way other people do things and getting better at it. As ever, like and subscribe, do all that good stuff. A huge thanks for listening to me. I appreciate it as ever, and I will speak with you again soon. Thank you.